Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Charlie, and I too am thankful that you've given up your time tonight to come out and have a little bit of a think about this subject. And I guess when you look at that subject, and I don't know what you thought of when someone invited you to come tonight, when you looked at the subject of Jerusalem, the world's burdensome stone, will there ever be a solution? You probably thought that sounds like a pretty full-on subject, actually, very political. I wonder what this actually is going to be like. Now, I guess from the outset, we sort of would like to outline that it's not political, and we're not affiliated with any political group. We're not politically motivated by any of the parties involved in these issues which we see in the world, Israel or Palestine or anyone like that. I guess our motivation tonight is we're a group of people that meet here regularly in this hall because we believe that the Bible is still a really relevant and alive book today, just as much as it has been in the history in the past. Sometimes we think, the Bible is perhaps an old book that is perhaps irrelevant in our day and age now, and perhaps there's some principles that I can take from it in the way I live my life each day, but surely it doesn't have any sort of worthwhile take on my world here, living in 2024. Well, we hope to show tonight that we disagree with that. We actually think that the Bible not only has awesome relevance for the way that we should live our lives, principles by which we should live, but it's actually got an amazing story and an amazing purpose in which it tries to translate for it through its pages. There's a purpose to the Bible, and there's a message which is just as relevant today as it was back then. So hopefully you're going to be able to see that tonight. Now, this subject of Jerusalem is quite a topical one. It's in the newspaper today. It seems like it's in the newspaper every single day. And we want to just explore tonight what is going on over there in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's the capital city of the nation of Israel, and we want to try and understand what's going on there. Now, when you think about Jerusalem, Jerusalem is an amazing place. I don't know whether there's anyone that's been there before. I've been there before. I've travelled there a couple of times over the last sort of 10, 15 years. And if you've done any travel before, like what I love about a city, there's some cities you go to which you just get this feeling about. There's like a history about it. There's this amazing feeling about what's gone on here in the past. And it might even be a recent past. Like I got that feeling when I went to New York, or when I went to Istanbul, or when I went to Paris. Like, those are amazing cities, and there's amazing things that have happened there. I don't quite get that same feeling when I go walk the streets of Melbourne, unfortunately. But these other awesome cities in the world, I definitely get that feel. Now, when I went to Jerusalem, you definitely get that feel. There's a history about the place. There's a feeling about the people that are there that there's so much more to the story of this place than many other places in the world. Interestingly, this is what Neil Armstrong, the man who walked upon the moon, this is what he said when he visited Jerusalem in 1994. He said, "I'm more excited about stepping on these stones of Jerusalem than I was when I was stepping on the moon." It's an amazing statement, isn't it, from Neil Armstrong? Been to a place where very, very few others had been, but when he went to Jerusalem, he got that feeling about the place. Now, it's a city of only 1 million people. It's not a massive financial hub that anyone would go to do a great business transaction, and it's not even a really beautiful place in that sense. It's a city that's on the edge of a desert. It's very sandy. It's got a very sort of dull look to it. But there is something about this city which invokes in people very, very strong emotions. Very, very strong. And we're seeing that today in our newspapers, in the internet, when we look at it every single day. There is something going on over here. And it evokes the emotions deep down inside of all different people about what's going on there and what the future of that place is going to be. And maybe you have thought, And maybe you thought when you were given the invitation to this night, yeah, I've wondered about that place. Like, what is it over there? They're always fighting. There's always stuff going on. Why on earth is it always happening over there? Why can't they just get their stuff together and be able to move on? What is it about that place? Or maybe you've thought the opposite. You're just like, I don't even want to hear about it anymore. I just want to get involved in my life. And we can do that in Australia, can't we, sometimes? I'll just get involved in my life, or way away from the rest of the world, or just get into the footy and hope the Lions win on the weekend, which I certainly do, right? And just forget about all that's happening. And hopefully it'll all go away. But the thing is it's here too. I don't know whether you've noticed. I just went into the city last weekend, and there's like flags and protests going on about this city. And we are thousands and thousands of kilometres away from that place. And yet it's here too. So what is it about this place that evokes so much emotion? What's going on in that place? Well, I guess what we want to try and do tonight is look at what the Bible says about it. What it says about the place today, what it says about its history. And I think the history of that city actually contains the key to what its future is going to be, because that's the last thing we want to leave with. What is the future of that place? And that's that question that we asked. Is there a solution? Will they finally get it together, these people, and be able to sort out their issues? We want to look at what the Bible says about all those things in relation to Israel. So we're going to start by going back in time and having a very quick snapshot of the history of this city, and pick up some of the themes which hopefully you'll be able to see why there's so many people invested emotionally in this place, why there's the issues there are today, and hopefully at the end we're going to see where the future is for this particular place. And it's a future which, believe it or not, actually is of interest to you and me, even though we live so far away and perhaps think we're not connected to that city at all. It's a future which affects us all. So let's go back and have a look at this city and see the relevance of it for today and the future. So what we're going to do is just do a bit of a quick history timeline of this city to build up the background to this city. You might be familiar with some of this history, you might not be, you might be completely unfamiliar with it. So hopefully we can just give you a brief snapshot. The city is one of the oldest in the world. 1900 BC is the first reference of it in the Bible. And that's one of the oldest cities in the world. In fact, some people say it's the oldest continuously lived in city that exists upon the earth. There's a couple of cities that fit in that bracket, but Jerusalem's very much up there with one of the oldest cities in human civilization. And we first come across it in the Bible, and it's actually called Salem, right? A shortened version of Jerusalem. And what that word actually means, in fact, does anyone know what that word Salem means? It's a Hebrew word. This will be my only question for the audience. It means peace, all right? Salem means peace. And Jerusalem, the meaning of that city's name is the city of peace. That's what the name of the city is. Now, that's an ironic name because when we go through the history of this city, it's been anything but a peaceful history. In fact, it's been completely the opposite to a peaceful existence for that city. But that name of that city, the City of Peace, is a symbol used in the Bible of what its ultimate destiny will be. It will be a city of peace one day. So all the way back down there, nearly 4,000 years ago, this city started. Now, it then became established as Jerusalem, the city that we know today by the same name, in 1004 BC, right, by a man named King David. You might have heard of King David. He's one of the most famous kings in all of the history of the nation of Israel. And he founded this city, and this is an image of perhaps what it looked like at the time. It wasn't a massive city when it was first built, but he built it in 1004 BC, and he called it Jerusalem. And it became the centre of the kingdom of Israel at the time. There was a kingdom called Israel, and it was God's kingdom and God's people, Israel. And he established this kingdom as the capital city where he was going to live. Now, in fact, I've got this little pointer here, but you can probably see a little bit. This bit here was actually the original city, and this picture here is a picture of when his son Solomon came along and he built this temple at the back to God. And that was a really important part of the city, this temple to God right at the back of the city. And that's what the city originally looked like all the way back then. Now, when David, and he was a really important king to Israel, was sitting upon that throne, the Bible says that God came to him by one of the prophets and gave him a very special message, a promise to him. A promise about the future for his family and also the future for this city of Jerusalem. And this is what he was told in a book of the Bible called 2 Samuel chapter 7, which talks about the life of David. God said this to that King David. He says, "When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I'm going to raise up to you an offspring after you who shall come from your body, and I'm going to establish his kingdom, and he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." So God came to this man David and he gave him this very special promise. He said, "David, look, once you're in the grave and it's all over for you, sometime in the future, I'm actually going to elevate a descendant of yours who's going to be king just like you are. But this man is going to be a very special king. He's going to be different from you, David, because whilst he's going to sit on this throne in Jerusalem and reign as king, he's going to do that forever. He's not going to just reign for a little while like you or your son or your son's son. He's actually going to sit on the throne in Jerusalem and reign on that kingdom forever." That's a pretty amazing promise that this man was given. And clearly that promise hasn't come to pass yet. But that special promise became really important in the nation of Israel. And you might have heard this idea with the Jewish people about a Messiah. And this Messiah is the Messiah that's spoken about in this promise. They believe, the Jewish people, that this promised king is going to come one day and he's going to save them and he's going to sit on the throne in Jerusalem. And one of their first kings, David, was told that all the way back then in that time. Told about this future king that would come. Now, the nation of Israel went on to last about 500 years. It wasn't an eternal kingdom. It came to an end, but it had many kings that sat upon the throne, and it lasted about 500 years until around the year 587 BC. And what God actually told these kings as they sat upon this throne of Israel is he told them, if you disobey me, if you go against my will, eventually I will take you captive into a foreign land. Now, some of them followed after God, but many of them started not to follow after God until eventually God said, I'm going to have to take you as a people away into captivity to teach you a lesson. And that's what happened in 587 BC. The Babylonians, you might have heard of Babylon. That was a city that's actually in modern-day Iraq, right? You can go to the ruins today still. It was an enormous kingdom, the biggest in the world at the time, and it, in 587 BC, came into Israel, into Jerusalem, and it took captive all of the people, and they just completely destroyed it. Jerusalem has been destroyed completely twice in its history, and we'll see the other one in a moment. And this was one of them. They completely destroyed the place. They wrecked that temple. They destroyed everything. They burnt it with fire. They turned all the stones upside down. And all of the people in there were taken captive hundreds of kilometres away into the land of Babylon. And you know what? God told them when they went there, he said, you are never going to ever have a king sit upon your throne ever again until that one promised king that I told you about, he comes to be king. And you know what? That's true. That's happened. Just as God said it would. Ever since that moment, Israel have never had a king sit upon the throne in Israel again. They've had certain leaders, some priests and prime ministers in the land today, but they've never ever since had a king. And that's what they were told. When you go into captivity, you're never ever going to have a king again. Now, they lasted in captivity for 70 years. God said you're going to be in captivity in Babylon for 70 years, but eventually you will return back to the land. And they did return after 70 years of being in Babylon. And they slowly were able to rebuild the city of Jerusalem again. Slowly they rebuilt Jerusalem. But it was different this time. Because this time, as that says there, they did it under foreign occupation. They never had their own city anymore. They were under the occupation first of the Persians, then the Greeks, Alexander the Great, and then finally the Romans took over in 63 BC, and they took control of the area. So Israel did live in the city of Jerusalem, but they never had it as their own. They were under occupation that whole entire time, right through this particular period. And then as we move to when the Romans came and occupied Jerusalem, we come to this period of history in Jerusalem when this famous man, Jesus, came to live upon the earth. And he was born in the year 0, of course, because AD and BC used to be called before Christ and after his death, right? That's what they refer to. So Jesus appeared on the earth in the year 0. And this man had an enormous impact upon the world. And he only lived 33 years. Just a tiny short life. But his impact on the world has been enormous. We all know him. There's not a person in the world that wouldn't have heard of this man. And he was born in a little town called Bethlehem, just 10 kilometres outside of Jerusalem. And he lived his life in the nation of Israel. And what he said, his message was to the people of Israel, I am this Messiah that you know about, that you were promised about. I am this king that is to come. He was that special man that had been promised to David all those years before. But you know what? In the years that he told the Jewish people that, when he taught, you know what they said? They said, we don't believe you. We don't believe you that you're the special one. And so much did they not believe him that after he'd lived just 33 years, they actually put him on trial and killed him. And Jesus died in the city of Jerusalem, just outside the city up there in that little spot on the hill called Golgotha. He died upon the cross. And you know, when they put him on the cross and he hung upon the cross and died upon there, they put a sign up the top of that cross. And you know what it said? Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. But you know what? He never reigned as king. He was never reigning as king in those 33 years. But they put that sign above that cross. But Jesus said to them before he died, when you kill me, I'm going to rise again after 3 days. And the Bible says that that's exactly what happened. It says that miraculously, 3 days later, after going into this tomb, Jesus rose from the dead. And then he stayed upon the earth and spoke to his disciples. It said he spoke up to 400 or 500 people, saw and witnessed him. And he spoke to those people. And then after 40 days of spending that time, he went to a mountain, this key mountain here called the Mount of Olives. And it said that he ascended from there up into heaven. And before he did that, he said, I'm going to go now to heaven, but I want to let you know that I'm coming back. And I'm not going to tell you exactly when it's going to be, but I'm coming back to fulfill unfinished business. Now, what was the unfinished business? Well, he was never king, was he? He never fulfilled the promise of being that king that would sit upon that throne in Jerusalem. And so Jesus died and ascended to heaven. But you know what? Before he died, interestingly, he gave a special promise or prophecy, we might call it, about Jerusalem. He said, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to Jerusalem. I want you to listen really carefully. He said this to his disciples just a few days before he died. He said, I'm going to give you some information about what's going to happen to this city so you know beforehand what's going to happen. This is what he said. It's really interesting. He talked about the future of Jerusalem, and he did it in 3 parts, and we'll quickly look at those. The first he says, this is what's going to happen to Jerusalem. They shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. The first thing that Jesus says is, to his disciples, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed again. And not only that, all the Jewish people are going to be removed from Israel and they're going to be scattered to all the nations. And he warned the Jewish people that was going to happen. And he told the people, you should get out of the city because it's going to be destroyed. Now, some of the people listened to him and preemptively got outside the city, but many didn't listen. And they stayed in the city. And just 40 years after Jesus gave that message, exactly what he said came true. The Romans came in the year 70, and they surrounded the city of Jerusalem. They got fed up with the Jewish people. They surrounded Jerusalem, and they completely destroyed the place with fire. They completely destroyed all of the stones and all of the entire city and wrecked it all. And anyone who was left in the city was killed. Only those who had heeded the message beforehand actually got out. Everyone that was left in the city was killed. And you know what happened to the people? Exactly what Jesus had said. All the Jewish people scattered throughout all the rest of the world. That's why the Jewish people are scattered everywhere in the world. That's why there's so many Jews in Europe and all different parts of the world, because they mainly dispersed at this particular point and they spread themselves all throughout the world at that time when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. Now, the most precious part of that city for the Jews when it got destroyed, was the temple. Because that was their connection with God. And they burnt and destroyed that too. But you know when they left, out of all the destruction of that city, there was left just like one wall, a few bricks, which managed to stay after that destruction. And you know what? They've stayed all the way to today. And there they are there. And you might remember or have seen that picture before of that wall in Jerusalem and thought, why are these people worshipping that wall? Why are they so fascinated with that wall? There's like hundreds of thousands of people wanting to touch this wall. Well, that wall is the last and only bit left of the Jewish temple, which they were so precious for, their connection with God. You see why this city is becoming so important to so many people? It's the centre of where Jesus lived. And there's 2.5 billion people in the world that say that they are Christian people. And that's the very centre of where their master lived. And now the Jewish people, it's the very centre of everything that they believe in too. This wall in Jerusalem. So Jesus said Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, but he also said something else about what would then happen to Jerusalem. He then said, look, after it's been destroyed and taken captive and the Jewish people spread throughout all the world, he then said this, Jerusalem will then be trodden down of the Gentiles. Now that word Gentiles, what that means is non-Jews. You could translate that as foreigners. And Jesus said, you know what's going to happen after Jerusalem has been destroyed? Foreigners are going to come in. And they're going to occupy this city and tread all over it for a long period of time. The Jews are going to have nothing whatsoever to do with it. And when we look at history, that's exactly what happened. After AD 70, the Jews were removed. The Romans took control of that city, and we're told actually about 50 years later that Hadrian, one of the Roman emperors, you've probably heard of Hadrian and his wall in Britain, he came along and he ploughed the city like a field, and it was completely unrecognisable, and you would never have even known that there was a city there. And he said, we're going to turn this into a completely different city. And so the Romans occupied it for hundreds of years. But then there was other people that came along to occupy it. The Muslims then came along to occupy it. Then there was the period of the Crusades. And Jerusalem, during this period, for this 2,000-year period, went back and forth between all sorts of different people. You know, Jerusalem, and this is at very least, they reckon, has changed hands 44 times. So it's been captured and recaptured and captured and recaptured and rebuilt and destroyed 44 times at least. That's how interested and passionate people have become about this particular city. And all these different people over this 2,000-year period trod upon Jerusalem, just like Jesus said. Now, one really interesting person, influential person, who came to Jerusalem at that time was this person, Muhammad. You've probably heard of Muhammad. He started his own religion, sort of connected to a little bit to Christianity, a little bit to the Jewish religion, and he called it the Muslim religion. And he founded it in Arabia, and then once he started it in Arabia, he came up and he visited Jerusalem. And he said in his book called the Quran, he said, when he was at Jerusalem, I had this amazing vision, and I actually ascended up into heaven while I was in Jerusalem. And that spot from which he ascended, after he died, they built a special memorial on top of that spot where he said that he ascended up into heaven. And you might recognise that memorial that they built. It's this building here. And it's called the Dome of the Rock. And that's that building that you always see when you see a picture of Jerusalem, that golden top. That's there to commemorate, that's a Muslim temple to commemorate where Muhammad was supposedly gone up to heaven. And it's considered in the Muslim faith the third most sacred place in all the earth. And you know, there's 2 billion Muslims. So there's another 2 billion people that are passionate about this place. And you know what's also interesting about that building? You know where they built it? They actually built it right on the very spot where that Jewish temple used to be. So the Romans bulldozed the Jewish temple, and then Muhammad and the Muslims went and put their temple right on the very top of it. It's a recipe for disaster, isn't it? And all these people through history have got this passionate link to this city of Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem went through all these different hands, as I said, for 2,000 years. It ended up with the Ottomans, which are the Turkish people. They got it in about 1500, and they kept it for about 300 or 400 years. And you know who took it off the Ottomans finally? The Aussies, believe it or not. The Aussies took it off the Ottomans. In the year 1917, in World War I, the last group ever actually, army on horseback, was the Australian Light Horse Brigade. You might have seen the movie. And they actually went through from the south up into the land of Israel, and they took the city of Beersheba, and they joined with the British Army, and they eventually went in, they pushed the Turkish people out of Jerusalem. And here's a picture of the British troops, and the Aussie troops were there with them. So it's interesting, isn't it? We're connected to this story, even though we don't even know it, perhaps. We're part of the history of this place. And they pushed the Turks out, and the British then had control. Another group of foreigners took control of this nation, or this city of Jerusalem. But you know, Jesus, although he said that the nations of the earth, the foreign nations, would trample down this city for a long time, he said it won't be forever. He said eventually that time will come to an end. And that's what he said here in the third part of his little prophecy. He said, and Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. There's going to come a point where the Gentiles have had enough time trampling down Jerusalem. And God said, I'm going to bring then my people Israel back to their homeland, back to Jerusalem. And you know, that's what exactly happened in history. It's amazing history when you look at it. And how did that happen? Well, it happened as a result of another huge major event in the world that we're all familiar with, and that's World War II, and what a horrific event that was for mankind. And one of the most horrific things about that event for the world was after World War II, when they discovered the horrors of the Holocaust and just how disgusting man can be to each other. And as a result of that, the nations of the world got together and they formed the United Nations. The United Nations formed after World War II, and they said, we want to try and get a group of nations together to try and stop these world wars from happening again, because we're sick of these world wars happening. We want peace. And one of the first things this group of United Nations decided upon together was that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, they should be given a homeland. And that's what they decided in 1948. They held a vote, and the UN decided that the Jewish people were going to be given a state, and they were going to be given a land. And all these Jews from all the different parts of the world began streaming back into Israel. You know, that's unbelievable in history. Like, as in, it never happens. You know, when a people get overtaken by another people. When the Romans came in and they destroyed other particular types of people, within a generation, those people have amalgamated into whatever nation they lived in. But the Jewish people lived outside of their country and outside of their homeland for 2,000 years, and they retained in that 2,000 years their identity of who they were. And after 2,000 years, just like Jesus said, they came back and they formed a nation again. That's a miracle. That is a miracle. Not of Israel's doing, but I believe someone far greater that's orchestrating all of this. And Jesus said that would happen before it actually happened. So what happened after Israel were given a statehood? Well, what the UN decided, and this is really interesting, is they decided with Jerusalem, look, it's actually too hard. We're going to give them Israel, but we can't give them Jerusalem because just people are too passionate about it. So you know what they decided? They said, we're going to take control of Jerusalem. And it's going to become an international city, and the UN is going to control it. Well, that lasted about 2 weeks. Because as soon as Israel got into the land, all of the Arab nations and the people that lived in Israel, they were really upset. People like the Palestinians were upset that their homeland was getting overtaken by these Jewish people. Why should this happen? And an all-out war started almost immediately as they declared themselves a nation. And the two nations came together in Jerusalem. And very quickly, this is what Jerusalem looked like. It became divided right down the middle. And the Israelis took West Jerusalem, and East Jerusalem was managed by the Arabs. And at that time, it was managed by the country of Jordan, which borders Israel. And it was a border that ran right through the middle. And the old city of Jerusalem, where the temple and all those special stuff is, that stayed on the Arab side. Now, there were tensions and wars that then happened over the next number of years in the Middle East. And the next notable one was in 1967. You might have heard of the Six-Day War, when out of nowhere, all the Arab nations invaded Israel, and Israel retaliated, and it was over in 6 days. And after 6 days, amazingly, Israel actually pushed their borders out that far, much further in Jerusalem. And most importantly, they got that old city and their wall back. Now, you imagine how that went down in the international community. And the Arab people that lived there in Jerusalem, no good. And it caused enormous tension. Enormous tension was caused by what happened at that particular time in Israel. All sorts of contention. And ever since, the nations of the world have been trying to find a solution for that. Over the next 50 years, from 1967 to 1922, everyone who's anyone has tried to fix that problem. Every US president, Bush, Clinton, Hillary, not that Hillary was ever president, but Hillary Clinton, Trump, he's been there, he was loving it, doing handshakes, trying to solve this problem. All these people, going right back to 1967, have got together with these leaders. They sit down with Israel, they sit down with the Palestinians, they sit down with other Arab nations, and they try and come up with a solution for this problem. And they always do these handshakes and say, yeah, we've done the deal, it's fixed. But it's never fixed. And you know what it always comes down to? It always comes down to Jerusalem. It always comes down to Jerusalem. Because no one wants to budge on Jerusalem. And so everything always breaks down. Now, this is where we get to the title of our talk. You might have thought, what's that mean? Jerusalem is a burdensome stone. Well, it's actually taken from a passage of the Bible. And it's a prophecy as well. A prophecy from this prophet called Zechariah. And he spoke about our time, right? He says this, on that day. And that phrase, on that day, is talking about all the way in the future for him, the modern time, when Israel got back in the land. He says, on that day, those last days, this is what it's going to look like in Jerusalem. He says, I'm going to make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves. Anyone who tries to fix that problem, anyone who tries to delve into the detail and try and divide or come up with a fair way of working out peace in Jerusalem, he said, it's going to be like you holding this enormous, heavy stone. Robbie drew that picture for us, and I reckon it's an awesome picture. Because doesn't it show what trying to lift or solve the problem for Jerusalem is like? Because what you're carrying, essentially, is all that history that we've looked at tonight, and all that emotion that's caught up with all those different religions going back in time. And people are trying to, when they solve that problem, they're trying to lift that enormous stone. How on earth can it be done? And to this point in our world, it hasn't been done. And you know what? It seems to be getting worse. Just the last couple of years, it's escalating, isn't it? And what caused the escalation? Well, it's all about Jerusalem ultimately, and who gets what bits of land. But ultimately, the latest escalation was caused on the 7th of October last year, nearly 1 year ago, when the Palestinians, who were run by a terrorist organisation, they'd had enough, and they went in and they took 251 people hostages. It was a horrific, terrible event. And then Israel has retaliated, hasn't it? And it's also gone and fought against Gaza and all the Palestinian areas. And slowly it seems to be escalating and escalating and escalating. And then Iran got involved and they started firing rockets. And now Lebanon's involved in the north of Israel and they're starting to fire rockets. And Israel on each side is being surrounded and everyone's got their opinions. The UN's got their opinions and America's got their opinions. And as we said at the very start, we're not immune from it either, are we? Because on virtually every city street, you will see the flags of the opposing nations as they chant for their section or what they believe is peace. What's the solution for this city? And where will it end? Where will it end? What is the future? Well, I guess to this point, we've been looking back at the history of Israel, and I hope what you've found is that you've seen that the Bible actually has been quite accurate in predicting and showing how the history of Israel would unfold. And so now when we get to what the Bible says about what the future holds for this place, maybe you can put some kind of trust in what it says, or at least think I'm going to give that some thought. Because the Bible does say what's going to happen to Jerusalem in the future. And it's not great news initially. This is what that prophet Zechariah goes on to say. After he'd said that Jerusalem was, in our day, was going to be this heavy stone, this is what he then went on to say would be the future of Jerusalem. He says, this is what's going to happen next in Jerusalem. I'm going to gather all nations against Jerusalem to wage war. And the city's going to be taken and its houses are going to be plundered. The Bible says that ultimately this escalating war is going to escalate into war with all nations. And it's all going to centre around Jerusalem. That's the next thing that it says will happen, or ultimately will happen in Jerusalem. Now, I've got a picture here, which I'm not going to go into, but it's another prophecy in the Bible which actually talks about some of the nations that might come against the nation of Israel. The countries there that are in the red are the countries that ultimately, the Bible says, will be antagonistic towards Israel to finally come down and perhaps provoke this war. And there will be some other countries, shown here in the blue, that will try and stop that from happening. And it's interesting that some of the antagonists, Bible students believe, maybe countries like in the north of Russia and Iran will be some of those antagonistic nations which may come forward and begin this conflict in Jerusalem. But that's what the Bible says the destiny of this place is. It will, firstly, be the site of ultimately all nations coming to conflict. But that's not the end of the story. And that's important because we don't want that to be the end of the story. See, what that conflict, the Bible says, will bring about is the biggest event which the Bible talks about over and over and over again. It's the event that we referred to earlier, that Jesus said to his disciples before he ascended to heaven. He says, you know what? I'm going to heaven now, but I'm not going to stay there forever. I'm returning one day to take up my destiny. And the Bible says that this moment of conflict, when Jerusalem looks lost, when it looks like it's going to be destroyed for all time, it will be that moment when Jesus Christ returns to come to save them. This is what Zechariah goes on to say. Then the Lord will go to battle, and he will fight against those nations just as he fought in battles in ancient days. And on that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives that lies to the east of Jerusalem. The Bible says that this man, Jesus Christ, is going to return to the earth. And you notice where he's going to return to? The Mount of Olives. That's where he left from. And he's going to return back to that spot in the middle of this conflict. And what's he going to do? He's going to save Jerusalem. All the nations that battle against that city, he will overcome. And he will take charge in Jerusalem. This is what the Bible says will happen. And then once he's taken control of Jerusalem, what's he then going to do? Well, Zechariah goes on to say, and then the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, and his name one. He's going to take up the throne. And that's that promise that was made to King David all the way back to the start, when David was told, you are going to have a descendant who's going to become king. And he's going to reign on the throne in Jerusalem. Now, notice who his subjects are, who he reigns over. Is he just going to come to Jerusalem and rule Jerusalem? Or is he just going to come to Jerusalem and rule just the nation of Israel? No. The Bible says that he will be king over all the earth. And that's actually the message and purpose of what the Bible teaches. It says that one day this special Messiah is going to come and he's going to completely change this world. He's going to bring about a revolution in this world that we've never seen. And it's all going to start when he becomes king in Jerusalem. That's what the message of the Bible says. Now, what will then be the final destiny of Jerusalem when he becomes king? Well, it's the destiny that we talked about right at the very beginning. This is what Jerusalem will look like when he becomes king. And men will dwell in it, and there will be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. This man is going to finally be the one to actually bring peace to the world. He's going to do it. All those people with the handshakes trying to do it, he's actually going to bring it about. He's going to bring peace. Now, when you go to Jerusalem today, as I said, I've been, it's not a place of peace. Although you don't feel, in danger all the time. I remember going to Jerusalem, there's soldiers with machine guns and other people with guns everywhere. It's not like here in Australia. But at this time, this man is going to bring peace, finally, to that place. And it will be the city of peace. That's the Bible's message about Jerusalem. Hopefully you've been able to see that through the Bible tonight, and you've hopefully been able to take something from that. And I'll just leave you to think about this. You might think, okay, well, what about this latest escalation? Is that all leading to this? Well, we don't know exactly. This escalation might die down, and maybe there will be some kind of deal or something that quietens it down at some point. But I guess the message we want to take from this, and the message that the Bible is trying to tell us, is no one will bring lasting peace but Jesus. There is always going to be problems in this place. And whenever you see problems, think about that. They will never be solved until the King returns to bring about that destiny. And perhaps maybe for us, what we can take away is, remember what Jesus said to the people of Jerusalem before it was destroyed. He said, make sure you listen to my message. Some people did listen to it, and they got out of the city, and they saved their lives. But some people just put off the message, and they never listened to it. So perhaps that's something that we can think about tonight as we go away. So thank you very much again for your time and for your attention. I really do appreciate it. I hope that maybe it's filled in some of the gaps for you when you look out in the world and you see all these strange things happening, at least from the Bible's perspective. And hopefully, maybe what it's prompted you to do is think, I might have a think about that a little bit more, and about what that perhaps means for my life or for the destiny of the world itself. So thanks again for listening, and we look forward to sharing supper together after this. Thanks, Charlie.